Okay, so the first item on the agenda is the provisioning request API. But before we go there, I just wanted to quickly ask if you had a chance to look at the documentation PR that Kuba opened before. We got some comments, but I think not from the core Carpenter team.
It's on my list this week. I know that Nick had looked at it, and then there was a product person that was also interested on the AWS side that was kind of eyeing it as well. So we do have people that are aware of it. I'm planning to actually make comments. Yeah, over the next couple of days. I assume some other people on the team as well. But yeah,
Sure.
should have
We got a bunch of comments, I think, from Azure team working on Carpenter.
Yeah, but I'm also already responding to Nick. I assume Nick is working with you, right?
It was Nick. Nick did make comments. I saw him pinging me about it yesterday.
Yeah. He's made some. I'm responding.
Okay, perfect. And yeah, there's people on our team that are looking at it. Yeah. So
Thank you.
Okay, so in this case, let me maybe pick up the provisioning request API topic. So this is a bit of a hot topic right now for us because the batch working group would like to have it in cluster autoscaler 130, and we're currently discussing what to do next. So one option we have is essentially just disabling it for 1.30.0, which we should really be releasing in the next day or two, given that Kubernetes 130 is out. And then we can consider re-enabling it or making some changes or something in a patch version, which is not the nicest solution, but it is an option. But I think that the main question is the review or opinion from the Carpenter. We know how it can work in cluster autoscaler, but it would be obviously better if we can have this in future as a shared API, or if we cannot or should not, then that would also be a valuable feedback. We can say this is a cluster autoscaler API and I guess name it appropriately. I don't think there is anything in particular that would stop it from working with Carpenter. But just to give some background, let me explain the use case. So the currently, at least for the first iteration of the API, the main use case is essentially integration with Queue. I don't know if you're familiar with Queue. It's a job orchestrator project. And as I understand, what they primarily need it for is kind of gang scheduling or all or nothing job startup scenario. So the main features that it has is essentially check capacity mode, which is just basically creating a CRD that has a pod spec and the number of pods and asking cluster autoscaler whether all those pods would be able to schedule. So it's kind of just using CA's ability to simulate scheduling. And the other option is to essentially try to provision capacity. But I think that try to provision is there's discussion on how this should be called, but like it's essentially kind of best effort atomic. So cluster autoscaler would try to add this all the required nodes in one go, or not if it cannot because of quota or something that it can detect. It would not. But then obviously it's not guaranteed to be atomic. That would require provider side APIs to provide some stronger guarantees, which generally cluster autoscaler cloud provider integration doesn't have. So this is kind of where this is right now, right? It's not necessarily solving that kind of generic balloon pod over provisioning use case, because it's, as I understand, it's all around this all or nothing use case, which is not how balloon pods normally work. And again, because of this all or nothing use case, it's more of a one-off attempt. It's not continuously being reconciled. It's just doing this scale up, saying, okay, now it's done, you can start your job, but it's not doing like continuous reconciling. So it's actually very specific. I think none of those things are fundamental to the API. Like we could further build it into a more generic over provisioning API with like different reconciliation modes and so on. But this is the current state, and I'd be curious to hear your opinions on this.
So just to clarify, when you say you want it 130, it's still an alpha, right? Like, there's plans to promote it, is what you're saying?
Sorry?
The provisioning request custom resource is it not still an alpha, or is it?
It's currently labeled as a beta API.
Okay.
Mhm.
Got it. And it's not been released yet, is that right?
Correct, because we haven't released 130. So
Is there
basically
a reason why, is there a reason why it's a beta API? Or is it just that Q1 certain guarantees that functionality won't be removed from Cluster Autoscaler in the future? I guess I'm curious. The only reason I'm asking is because, like, I think Maciek, you and I have talked a little bit about like wanting to align potentially on an API that would be useful potentially for Carpenter. And I don't know if we have enough. I obviously don't have a long enough feedback loop here to really like give strong feedback to like remove the functionality later if we release it. So I don't know. Like, we didn't even have an alpha version of the API, right? So we're confident enough in the current spec that we're comfortable with it.
So I think part of this, right, the API is not labeled as Kubernetes API right now. It's like x-Kubernetes IO, which is extension API. And I think we don't really have a well-defined notion of alpha in cluster autoscaler the way we do. Because it comes in Kubernetes, it comes with those feature gates and so on, which we don't really have. So it is still something that would be enabled as opt-in in cluster autoscaler. It's just about naming at that point. We could name it alpha, beta. The whole process is slightly unclear because, again, it's not called Kubernetes API.
Yeah, I think because, well, I think the only guarantee that I understand around beta APIs, like feature flags and whether it's enabled by default is kind of like a semantic choice, and like Kubernetes does different things from feature gates. I think now with feature gates, now they disable them by default, but starting on like 124 or something like that. But my understanding of the beta communication mechanism for a custom resource is that it means that I guess you can change the API, but the functionality doesn't get dropped.
I think that's the idea, yes. And I think it's basically coming from people wanting to use it kind of in time frames that are not consistent with whatever, going to alpha, beta, and so on. So I think it's purely timeline thing.
Guy Maciek, like how confident are y'all? This is the right like the correct move to say like this is the thing we're going to support. I guess we can change the API.
Yeah, I think the functionality itself is not as controversial. Like the API essentially boils down to pod spec and number of replicas, which I mean, if you imagine CRD for doing this sort of thing, it's hard to imagine how it would not include those elements, at least as an option. Like you could have more advanced API where you just specify number of CPUs and so on, but that obviously has the problem of there is no guarantee your actual pods are going to schedule. So for something like queue integration, where the queue actually wants to schedule a specific job and it notes the pod spec, that seems like pretty obviously a correct API. Whether it could have some sort of improvements or extensions to allow using it for other use cases, probably. But that could be evolved before we go to GA.
Yeah, I just want to make sure. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just some more details about the API. It's in my opinion extremely generic. It's basically, as Maciek mentioned, a pod spec plus a counter of how many pods like that we want to provision for, which we could treat as optional and like a union and substitute this for something else in the future. And there's a provisioning class field, which basically specifies all of the semantics. So right now, what they need for queue and for the batch stuff, like they want what they have right now. This is like a single provisioning class in this API. So I would imagine that whatever other functionalities we come up with on top of it would just become new provisioning classes. So like this could be okay because the API is extremely generic, is what I'm saying. But like we would still like to see a review from your side. We're still evaluating whether to just completely disable it in 130 or whether to like push it through to enable the queue case basically. But like if you could review and if you see anything blocking in the API as it is right now, again, it is very small and easy to understand right now. Then we can still we still have the ability to block it, I guess.
Yeah, I'm just a little concerned that if we are talking about ways that we can align the two projects, we can definitely look at it. I'm concerned that we're gonna. I mean, again, I think we have some ability to change the.
Yeah, for some reference, like the process on this API started, I think, way before the alignment plans, and it's like the lack of alpha is indeed surprising. But well, the argument from the Q people is basically that they have gathered some feedback from like internal uses of this API, like not back when the API was not officially Kubernetes. Like it was an internal API that was then open sourced, and there are some like use cases and feedback that we could leverage. So it's not like it's brand new completely. Yeah, and like the difference here in the alignment and in how this API we're treating it right now, it's mostly stemming from like the fact that the API has been actually in development for I think quite some time, and this is just like following the process. I'm not sure though much.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess I would be more interested to see if it could. I would still push back against it being beta. That's my personal take. Like, I get the argument from the Q side, which is we need it. Yeah, but like I also think that that's like we've seen how long DRA has taken. Not that that's a great example, but like a lot of people need DRA, and there's a lot of push behind that, and that's still sitting in an alpha state. Granted, it got rewritten, but I guess I'd just be more interested to see like how users are actually. I guess they're using like a pre-release version of CAS to be able to see how users are using it on their end. Yeah.
They have a custom implementation, like essentially.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I mean, those are shared within the context of the CAP when it was originally proposed, or I guess the AEP is what we called it. I guess we're kind of my only concern is we're deviating from like the well-known graduation process for APIs in Kubernetes, and we're not like giving users a chance to use it before we're gonna like promote it to beta.
Yeah, I have a concern. I have the same concern. It feels like we're painting ourselves into a corner. I don't think we need to currently.
Because I think we also didn't like you mentioned, like we didn't have this kind of like consistent talking relationship between Carpenter and Cass. And I think now that we can have this kind of cadence, it gives us an opportunity to do a much better job at like figuring out how these things intertwine between the two projects and figuring that out ahead of a beta for like if it's provisioning request or something else, like just figuring that out ahead of a beta release. And also giving users like beyond just Q a chance to mess with the API and give feedback on it.
Maciek, if you're trying to say something, you're muted.
Thanks. Sorry about that. So I think that I broadly agree that makes a lot of sense. I guess the request would be given the kind of interest of working group batch. The question would be if this is something we can review and look at in like kind of prioritize that, not necessarily implementation, but just the review and having a discussion. again, from timeline perspective, that doesn't mean enabling it in beta necessarily to tomorrow or anything like this. Rather, just to have this discussion if we can do it more quickly. And I think a general question is, I think realistically, we're probably unlikely to be able to, for things like this, like for new APIs or any shared functionality, to be able to launch it in both Cluster Autoscaler and Carpenter at the same time, just because of needing people to actually implement stuff. And we don't want implementation, like we don't want to block implementation in CAS for, let's say, a release or two because there is no one in Carpenter who would pick it up, or vice versa, right? Because it goes exactly both ways. And so I think we should have a process where we maybe review the API and functionality, and if we say it looks okay, then it's okay to proceed with implementation in one component and without waiting for the other, even to the point of doing beta or GA even, right? I mean, because we want those to happen in finite amount of time. So I don't know, do we want to say that prerequisite for moving API to GA is implementation in both CAS and Carpenter? That would be ideal state. It's much better to actually have an implementation than to just have opinions of maintainers who says, yeah, I think we can implement this, but then obviously down the road in implementation, we can run into any number of issues. But then again, is there some way we can actually make this happen without blocking for a very long time just because there is no one currently doing the implementation? I don't know what the balance here is.
Yeah, I don't know if blocking on the Carpenter implementation side is the right mechanism. I agree. Like there may be different prioritization, and as a result, like it's going to cause one to lag behind the other. Like we also wouldn't, I don't think we'd want to block like launching a feature we felt strongly about on our side if it either didn't apply to CAS or CAS didn't have the resources to implement it. I think minimally we would just want like to think about alignment on the reason, like on whatever the thing is, and then determine if yes, we want to align on that thing, and then from there, like give a basic sign off on like the overall API and the direction, like for these cases, for how it applies to both CAS and Carpenter. And then assuming those things are aligned and we're checked off on that, then it seems reasonable to me that like implementation can happen completely asynchronously.
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Would it make sense for the next step then to be specifically for this case? I know there is the old IAP that has been like submitted a while ago, but I guess we can have, well, I can ask the Q team to prepare some sort of summary of like doc or PR or something on like with all the updated changes. It would probably be just the old IAP really plus whatever delta they have from this that came up in implementation, and we can review it. Or would it make sense, for example, to have a meeting like on some meeting down the road to just have someone present it, just go over the API? Would that help in the review process?
I don't know if I think to some degree, like I looked over this when it was first proposed, and then it just because we again didn't have like a working cadence and like a consistent feeling around like how these things were going to align. I didn't like give it as much priority as I probably should have. I think there's been a couple people on our like on the Carpenter maintainer team that have kind of glanced at it but haven't really like thought about it deeply. I think some of it is like literally just like getting more people to look at it and point at it and be like, hey, how would this work in Carpenter? I think the other thing is that comes to mind for me. How much have we considered like, I know Maciek, you and I talked about this at KubeCon. Like, how much have we considered like expanding? Like, is this applicable to SIG scheduling in any way? Like, are there details in here that would matter in the context of that, or is it very tightly scoped? Like, is this a gang scheduling? It kind of is a gang scheduling requirement, right?
That's a tricky question. It's not really gang scheduling by itself, and it's not how scheduler does gang scheduling. It's only gang scheduling if you actually have a queue, or I guess it's a primitive that allows you to build gang scheduling or a different use case. The way it works with queue, and I may be getting this wrong because I'm not claiming to understand all the technical details, but as I understand it, I think the way it works is you can have this notion of a post job. So you can pause a job, and then it doesn't actually create a pod. So you have a job object, but it doesn't create, the job controller is not yet creating any pods. And then you have, you can unpause it, and then the pods will be created. So what can happen is if you have a higher level management system like queue, you can essentially first validate if there is space for your job, and only then essentially let the job controller create the pods. And if you know all your jobs are coming to your mechanism, you can essentially do gang scheduling by just gating job startup on queue, or again, any other similar system, having validated there is capacity. But it's not gang scheduling just because you have this mechanism of provisioning requests. It's really just a building block. And it works specifically for jobs, I think, because of this semantics of I can have a job without actually having pods. I guess you could build any sort of custom controller with this sort of semantics, but I don't think that model works out of the box for something like deployment. I don't know if there is any use case for gang scheduling of deployments anyway, but
Yeah.
but I guess you could also use it for other use cases. That's just the use case the authors of this PR have in mind. But I could imagine something like if I want scale up at a specific time, for example, because I expect, I don't know, flash sale event, like whatever predictable capacity requirement spike, you could presumably just have cron create a CRD like this or something like that. Essentially, any sort of higher level system that you want to build on top of Kubernetes could use that. If you're using it manually, I don't really see why you wouldn't just use balloon pods. I don't know what the benefit over balloon pods is, but I guess it's much easier to manage CRD like this if you're.
You don't have to. I think some users have hit scalability limits with a lot of balloon pods, and this just has a counter, and then like it behaves as if it was many balloon
That
pods.
is a benefit. Yes,
That's one benefit.
scheduler preemption can be expensive if you have thousands and thousands of balloon pods. At least that's what we've seen. So that is a benefit, yes. But yeah, it would be interesting to have this discussion. So yeah, I think right now we have like we can disable it in 130, as I said, and then we can come back to this discussion. But what would be the action item to make sure it actually happens?
I mean, I think we should like whatever, maybe next meeting or the meeting after. I don't know. Maybe next meeting is the right call. I don't know if we'll have any other discussion topics like to say we're going to have like read through it, thought through it, get the relevant anyone that's interested on the Carpenter maintainer team to like think about the problem and then come back and have a discussion on it. I think the other thing is I also don't. Well, who wrote this AEP?
Sorry?
Who wrote this AEP?
Who wrote it? I know Marcin was involved. If he wrote it personally, I'm not sure.
Okay. The other thing I'm a little worried about, I don't know, and I don't know how much thinking was there that isn't present in this proposal. And I'm not like deeply familiar with like CEPs, although I've looked at the CEPs a little bit, and my understanding was that they typically like, don't they generally provide like a lot more detail on use cases and then like a lot more detail on options? I guess my concern is like the way that this was attacked is like, here's the way that we should do it. And it doesn't consider like any of the potential overlap that might have with potentially other SIGs, potentially other features in Kubernetes. Like I don't want to ask somebody to like rewrite it because I think it was already merged. Like we can't like ask somebody to rewrite it. But I'm just a little concerned that like
I think going forward, I think this was written in the time where essentially we're only looking at cluster autoscalers is SIG autoscaling, and then because of this, right, the way we were proceeding with a lot of proposals and so on, like we have this whole lot of old proposals in cluster autoscaler repository, which is very different process than CEPs. I think kind of going forward, we should lean more towards cap process. So I hope next time basically something like this comes around, we just do a cap essentially. But yeah, at this point it's very hard to go back and ask people who did this a year ago. Can you now do a cap?
Yeah. I was just curious what your and like guys' feeling is on like how thorough the process was, or if it wasn't sufficiently, like how much thinking was done that maybe isn't present in the doc.
That's a good question. Interestingly enough, which I find slightly surprising, there is actually like Kubernetes API reviewers taking part of this discussion on the original app, which we'd normally it's not the set of people we'd normally have in cluster autoscaler reviews. So I think there was quite a bit of discussions. Probably with maybe next time we can have Marcin, right? Because this is a lot of context on historical stuff I was not involved in, which makes it very difficult for me to answer.
Yeah, that's my other big concern is if we're going forward with something that no one on the cast maintainer team has context on.
I mean, technically, I guess on the side of what it's doing and implementation, I feel I have quite good understanding, but and kind of the use case.
I've been reviewing pretty much all of the recent implementations, so I'm also up to date. And we also know the motivations and the use cases and some of the feedback from the batch use case, which is pretty much just the only thing we have right now for the API. And like in my opinion, like there was a lot of thought put into figuring this one use case, but there wasn't like enough thought put into like a broader, how it fits into a broader picture, as you mentioned, right? And there definitely wasn't, because like Carpenter wasn't involved in the SIG back then, that there wasn't like a structured approval process, which I think we definitely need. Like we need to have some sort of formal like conditions to accepting such an app.
I mean, again, I think going forward, I would prefer if you went the cap way, just because this is well recognized
makes
process.
Perfect sense.
I think as well, we can see with like there was an example even today in the SIG Autoscaling channel of people like coming across. I think it was this, right? It was provisioning request, like and going, I don't understand what the use case for this is. So yeah, I think we definitely, it doesn't feel like that doc currently gives people a clear idea of why this is a thing that we want inside the CA, what it's enabling.
Okay. Yeah, I think it makes sense. I mean, I think we've got, like we mentioned, like action items on our side, which I think we should probably do a better job. Definitely do a better job at like actually getting this done by next meeting. I think the requirement for next meeting is that we need to have like the relevant people have read this, and then like really think about it and figure out how it applies to Carpenter, and then reconvene. Minimally, that's like one of the items we should talk about next time. It's like how.
Yeah, I think this is less urgent, but I would like to consider if we can later on like have this as a more generic API for balloon pods, which I assume is also a use case for Carpenter. I think we discussed it at some point in the past. Or if we want to build a separate API that better fits more general use case. I hope not, but I don't think that's as urgent necessarily as reviewing the current one. But it is a discussion that would be worth having. And if we manage to, if we have some time, that would be I think good to think. Okay, how can we bring this to solve broader use case? Because it feels like the API that addresses balloon pod use case is really similar, right? What I need is an ability to have a CRD that triggers provisioning, and then I want to be able to specify what sort of capacity I want, and also I need to be able, which is essentially pod spec, and I need ability to consume it probably in a way that doesn't trigger endless reprovisioning, if that makes sense. Like if I provision capacity for my deployment, I want my deployment to be able to consume it. So there needs to be some link between deployment and the CRD. As otherwise, we would just provision endlessly, right?
Yeah, I think the other reason I was calling out that I think I completely agree. Like I think that there's so much overlap here that it's like we should really just potentially think about collapsing it and saying this is like one, like this is additional use case for this thing. Which is why I think we're we're strongly interested because there's a lot of customers that are using, well, not a lot, but I guess there are some customers we're aware of that are using like Unicorn with Carpenter, and like we say it probably works, but like we can't make any guarantees about its ability to work because they want the gang scheduling feature of Unicorn, and they want to be able to like schedule balloon pods with Unicorn. I think the only other reason I was thinking that SIG scheduling would be relevant here is because reserve capacity is probably something that I would assume that scheduling might want to be aware of. Like, wouldn't Kube Scheduler want to be aware of the fact that this capacity is being utilized and therefore to not schedule additional pods there? And then CAS has time to schedule schedule additional capacity for those other pods?
That's good question, I guess. I think a mechanism that involves a kind of on technical side that involves scheduler would probably look somewhat differently and be more complex. Like I think basically this is not trying to guarantee that scheduler cannot put additional capacity. I don't know if that's something we want. Because it feels like it's going to be really difficult, and also B, for at least a large class of use cases, that seems like a desired behavior. So maybe for this specific batch use case of I want gang scheduling, that's probably not ideal behavior. But if you know, like if you have higher level management system like Q, you basically don't need scheduler to guarantee that. And then if you actually want to do balloon pod like over provisioning, that's fine. You actually want pods to be able to schedule there, and you just reconcile it. Like if it's some other pod, not your target deployment, that's probably okay. It schedules in this capacity, and then the autoscaler just provisions extra capacity. That feels like kind of. I mean, that's the behavior of balloon pod. It seems.
I think this is the kind of like, I think we both all realize this. Like this is the kind of like thinking I would like to see written down personally.
Yeah, I agree. It would be good to have a broader. I think there are two parts to it. There is this kind of narrow queue integration use case, which is really what I think the original doc is about, and then a broader kind of design. Maybe we can start by discussing like next time the existing one and just focusing on this use case. I'd be actually quite interested in trying to write a design for a broader use case. I don't know if that's something you kind of collective you want. Like if anyone is interested in collaborating on that, I think that would be pretty interesting.
So from the like getting back to the original reason we were talking about this, well, I guess like at least in terms of timelines, right? Like when did you say the 130 timeline was for CAS?
I mean, I think that's like 1.30.0 is essentially now. So I think we don't want to block 130 on this. We can just disable it and then do the review and then like decide what to do next. Because I think since CAS vendors in scheduler and so on, we actually expect users to use 130 CAS with 130 Kubernetes. Now that 130 Kubernetes is out, we want to get 130 CAS ASAP.
Yeah, and like technically the implementation will be not toggleable, like we'll remove the flag. The API will still be in vendor of CAS, I guess, discoverable this way, but there's no way to use it apart from like hacking code and
Yeah, I
building
mean,
custom.
I assume the fact that there is some dead code in CAS that you cannot enable is not
Yeah,
really
and also right now the API is checked in, as Maciek mentioned, with this extension like URL. It's not technically a Kubernetes API as it is checked in right now. Even though I think it says beta right now, but again, it's not technically Kubernetes IO. It's an extension, so it's not official yet, as it would be released to 130 right now, and the implementation will be disabled.
Yeah, we don't want to roll back all the code, that like internal code. Like we assume just disabling it is enough, and like kind of at that late stage, just trying to roll back all the code feels too risky, just from perspective of building a release and then just making big code changes is
Yeah,
painful.
I think it leaves anyone who is absolutely desperate to have it with an option to, like, as you say, hack it, cut their own release, run it, but frees us of any potential, like if someone chooses to do that and we change things in the future.
Yeah, maybe we should mention it very explicitly in the release notes, that this API is not enabled, is very much subject to
I would
change.
just basically not mention it at all. If you have to,
I am not
like,
sure if
there
that
is
is
some
because
bad code.
I would prefer to have like our bases covered and to say like technically you can find some API in there, because like we have community members asking about it right now, right, on Slack, and it will still be on master. That won't change. I think saying that, yeah, this API is technically in CA code. Technically, you can find it in the like the 130 branch that we released, but like it's not enabled and it will change likely, and like to not depend on it. I would prefer to say this explicitly if we are like to change it. Then
I guess we can, but I don't know. Like, is the release notes? I guess, and this is kind of getting into philosophical question. Is the release note for the image we provide and the tag we provide? Like, basically, you just compile this code, or you use our image, or is this for whatever kind of code we have internally? Because I feel like, yeah, something like this. That's also an option. I guess we've been. I don't know. That's a kind of interesting question on the philosophy of release notes, because I think the target group of release notes is basically users, which is not people who are going to dig into the code.
But we've done stuff like this before. For example, for parallel drain, like we've been mentioning parallel drain in a couple of like minor releases that, yeah, we started implementing it, yeah, it's coming, do not use it yet. Like there are flags and some primitives, but it's not stable.
But then that was a flag that could be enabled, so that was different, I feel.
I
Like we
guess,
introduced
yeah,
a
okay,
flag,
fair enough.
so there was an experimental feature you could enable by changing a flag, which feels different. I don't know. I don't have super strong opinion.
I mean, if you don't see someone coming down the road in the future and arguing that this was released in 113 CA technically, and now like we are bound by something and can't change some part of it. If that's not a reason, yeah, then no issues from me.
I think we have seen in the past, though, people like go because a release is tied to tag, which is tied to a commit point. Like I definitely in the past have to explore, like, wait, where was this change introduced? I'm browsing around code tied to a tag, and therefore a commit. So I would still prefer to at least just mention it. Like I feel like it's probably most users aren't going to care, but for those who do care, it's less. It feels like it's probably less confusing for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think fair enough. So we can add this maybe at the end. That clearly seems to be the majority opinion. So I'm okay. Okay. So I think we have action items and kind of plan on this. I don't know if there is anything else we want to discuss today on this topic. Do we want to move to other topics? Do we have other topics?
Not sure if we had any other topics. Obviously, we had the DR working group class.
I have one thing, if there's nothing else. So Maciek already mentioned the website docs review, but one part of it, a very specific one, is the do not disrupt workload API. So I was wondering if there's someone on your side that could possibly work on it soon, or if there's anybody thinking about it, because I guess we'll probably need to comment out that part of the docs anyway for the time being until we get it actually implemented in some, probably until 131 really. But the sooner we have this implemented in both autoscalers, the easier it will also be, I guess, to align on any further APIs that we want to. So just reminding about that part.
Yeah, I think we have an AI as well, so we'll make sure that gets done. Thanks for reminding.
Thank you.
I guess we could even like write PR for this. I assume that cannot be very hard if I just grab Carpenter code for the existing annotation.
Yeah, we could. I'm just mostly asking for like a stakeholder or somebody, you know, with decision power to just say, yeah, we want this. And also for this particular API, whether I also need an answer to, so in CA, the annotation, the safe to evict has two values. One is safe to evict false, which means do not disrupt true in Carpenter. And the other one is safe to evict true, which has like the opposite meaning that I don't know if that makes sense in Carpenter. In CA, it basically means there are certain conditions that block consolidation of a node. Some of them are like pod based. For example, if a pod doesn't have a is not owned by a controller that would recreate it, CA will not try to consolidate such a node in order not to disrupt the pod because it's likely not coming back. So like the other version of this, the other value of this annotation basically says ignore any such blocking conditions. Like even though this pod looks like it should block consolidation, it actually shouldn't. And I was also wondering if that sort of semantics are needed for Carpenter, or even really if Carpenter could support it sort of trivially, if there are no such blocking conditions, because that would be we'd really like on our in CAS that would like provide full functionality under the same like annotation that we have right now. And it doesn't seem like something that would break or like something that would be I don't know somehow messing up Carpenter. I don't know if you have any opinions here.
I think the key issue is we just evict everything. Like we don't have any mechanism to like we let users opt out of the disruption mechanism, which you're probably aware of, and then we don't have any like safety. And that seems to have worked well because it doesn't create this like at least for us, it hasn't created like a it didn't get removed, so I need to add
something.
Yeah.
Yes. So would you
Yeah.
support like putting that part also in the shared sort of API space with the semantics that just in Carpenter it doesn't do anything because there are no blocking conditions? I'm just basically wondering if I'm trying to avoid like we have the old option. I'm trying to avoid splitting into like new common half
Yeah.
and new internal half.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess so you'd say that the safe to evict false would then just have the same functionality that it does today. So you basically have two things that would
like we'd have do not disrupt true, meaning what it means like in Carpenter, right? And do not disrupt false, which basically in Carpenter would not do anything, and in CA it would behave like the old setting does today.
Yeah, I guess if we had that functionality, the request would be if at any point in future you decide to add a kind of additional blocking logic in like default blocking logic in Carpenter, which it seems like you're not planning to, but then it would make sense to have this. Otherwise, it's no op.
That seems completely reasonable to me. Then everything's under one,
Perfect.
and you can maintain the functionality. Yeah, that sounds great.
All right.
Cool. Okay, so what like steps do we need then to like do this? Would it be okay for us to just open a PR in Carpenter to like add support for both and align on that on like merging the PR? And I can of course do the same in CAS.
That seems reasonable to me, like creating the PR and then linking it out to like obviously linking it to the top level thing that you had created, the issue.
Okay,
and
I'll take an AI then to take care of this.
Cool. I think the only other thing, did we talk about the prefer no schedule tank last time? I can't remember. On y'all's side. I think we only like the only thing that we had was basically just like a question that I'd be interested. It's not necessarily like it's a feature proposal on Carpenter's side, but it's basically asking for like very similar functionality to how y'all do like your taint orchestration. and probably has some bearing on like how we're going to potentially align on that. I don't know how much overlap there can truly be on like the entire life cycle, but I think like Jason has been working on some design around what we want to do when we see Carpenter meet certain life cycle conditions. So like if we see that underutilization, so nodes being underutilized in terms of pods is a bit of a different example, because the way that we want to handle it is most likely consider a node to be underutilized, and customers want us to be able to like wait for a little bit before we actually go and deprovision that, which I believe CAS has similar functionality. And we don't want to directly taint that node once we determine it's underutilized, because that would obviously sway pods away from it. But for other lifecycle conditions like expiration, where we say, okay, the node needs to die after some TTL, or drift, where something has changed in the desired state of the configuration for Carpenter that would cause it to need to like roll the node, we're thinking about adding a prefer no schedule taint, which obviously looks quite similar to how I think y'all do prefer no schedule. Also, is it also for consolidation or underutilization or something like that?
Yeah. So
basically,
we do it for underutilization and consolidation. So if there
I
is
guess-
a node that's, because it's only prefer no schedule, so it's stealing pods away from a node, but it's not preventing them
guess-
from scheduling.
Yeah, I guess
If
thinking
there's
about
no-
it more,
if
as I
there's
was
no
talking,
other
I was
place-
like, I think we
Yes.
could totally add the taint. I think Nick probably has more thinking on it as well, because I know he's planning on attacking like some of the changes that we're going to make in underutilization. But just thinking about it broadly, yeah, I don't see a reason why we couldn't add the prefer no schedule taint to that condition as well. Like it would just sway things away, but like if you have to schedule there, obviously you can still do it.
I don't think we've seen any issues with this pattern specifically, any really. I mean, like if there is no other node that can accommodate a given pod, it will still schedule. So really, like, I think users like this part. My question was, are you like, as part of this, are you trying to tackle the broader sort of node lifecycle story, or are you just are more focused on just Carpenter? I'm just wondering if this is the point.
The immediate thinking is Carpenter. My reason for raising it is I think we should think about it potentially in a broader sense. Because
I'm just wondering if
oh, sorry, go ahead.
this is like the place to like the moment to align, or and like do we need to involve node and like the other potential, or is this a moment to just like do something autoscaling specific, like do not disrupt, because that would be faster to iterate on, and sounds like this is something you need relatively soon, or like working on actively.
I mean, I think basically what we're talking about is that we've got a prefer no schedule taint that we want to add either when a life cycle condition is met, which y'all don't necessarily care about as much, or like when underutilization is met. And then we want to drain specific taint, which we talked about last time, which allows us to be able to drain daemon sets. And also to be aware of the fact that we are the one that tainted the thing, and to be able to untaint it in certain scenarios where we need to. Fundamentally, I think that's what we're talking about when it comes to, and then there's the whole like once the thing is tainted, how does the drain orchestration go? And we talked about like the server side drain.
Yeah, I mean,
which I think beyond this
is
yeah.
All of this is compatible with how CAS does consolidation. Like the only really thing we would need to align on would be the names, obviously, and like the specifics of the drain behavior, possibly, or we'd leave that to the autoscaler, because that's like, I know we have at least like a couple of components doing drain, right? Like kubectl, numerous upgrade components, CAS, Carpenter, right? Like every component is doing it slightly differently. And like we either stay in this state, or we try to like either align or at least start the alignment.
Given that we're both using prefer no schedule and no schedule. Sorry, I'll quickly say this and then not check. Yeah, it seems like easy win to decide to pick the same API group that we're going to use for do not disrupt, and just because we're basically doing the same behavior, and then it's very easy to conceptualize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels like basically what I wanted to say, and I think it's essentially what you said is that feels like something where we can take an iterative approach. If you're adding taint anyway, that's good opportunity for us to rename our absolutely terribly named taint and just have the same thing, because it doesn't even have a path. It's very old. And so we could use this as an opportunity just to align on names, even if like the drain logic is somewhat different, but then we can iterate as we improve. And yeah, I mean, server-side drain would be a great end state, but blocking any progress on getting there, it may take a while.
Yeah, even aligning the names is an easy win. That
Exactly,
will
exactly.
allow like the kubectl behavior, for example, unblock that, and probably a lot of other use cases.
Okay, so I guess if someone proposes a name with also migrating CAS to it, I think is what we're saying.
Yeah, we even have somebody in the community with a PR open already. We just don't have the names yet.
Okay, that's all I had. I think that's pretty much everything on the agenda at this point.
Cool. I think one last thing we should discuss is when is the next time we meet. Any thoughts on this? Should we meet next week?
It seems like enough time to me. We can obviously play it by ear. That ends up not being enough time. But
I
we
think.
can't.
Sorry.
We can do Tuesday, right? Like we've got to be able to. We got to shift it. I guess to Monday, because you don't have the SIG
Monday is
Autoscaling.
good. So Wednesday next week starts a long weekend in Poland. So Wednesday to Sunday next week is essentially a long weekend in Poland. So obviously not great for us. Monday would be good. So same time Monday?
Yeah, let's say same time Monday. We'll reconvene after we do some review on our side and make some progress on these AIs. I think most of them are. Well, I guess there's a couple on Kubo, but mostly on us. So, sounds good.
Sorry for that.
Hey, in that case, thank you and have a good day. Bye.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
So yeah.